Good morning and welcome to Dissecting Your Energy Bill, how to read it and where costs can be cut. You know, most businesses don't overspend on energy just because electricity is expensive. They really overspend because there are two main reasons. First, many businesses don't take advantage of timing and market dips in deregulated energy markets. And that's when contracts can often be purchased at a discount. And that's exactly where tools like Energy Edge AI come into play, helping businesses monitor markets and act strategically instead of just reacting. The second, and this is the bigger issue, most businesses don't actually understand what they're being billed for or how the changes that are on the bill and the charges that are on the bill have the greatest impact on those bills. Today, we're going to focus primarily on that second point, and that's understanding the energy bill itself, what the different charges mean, and what measures can be taken to reduce the impact. Before I go any further, I want to just introduce myself. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Scott Van Kerkhove. I'm with EnergyWise Solutions. And for the past 15 years, we have worked with recognizable brands like Burger King, Home Depot, Holiday Inn, helping them to better understand, manage, and reduce their energy costs. We partnered with owners, facility managers across all types of commercial buildings, from hospitality and sports facilities to climate controlled storage units and other specialty types environments, advising owners of 1,000 square foot barbershops to 150,000 square foot warehouses and the like. So no matter what the type or size of facility that you own and operate, everything we discussed today can be scaled accordingly. And at EnergyWise Solutions, we like to review the electric bills across multiple states, utilities, and market structures, both in regulated and deregulated markets. We see firsthand how tariffs, demand structures, and capacity mechanisms impact real operating budgets. We work with CFOs, facility managers, and business owners who are responsible for approving those bills every month. Yet, most people are never taught how utilities actually calculate those bills. A lot of times I get, hey, look, I just have no idea what I'm being billed for. And that's why this conversation matters, because you can't manage or reduce what you don't understand. So here's what we'll talk about today. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the commercial energy bills and how they're actually structured. We'll look at the differences between energy, demand, and capacity charges and why that matters. We'll look at some real examples from bills across multiple states and utilities. Look at where some of the biggest cost drivers typically hide, and then look at some basic strategies. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I do want to share with you guys some basic strategies and tools that will help you understand how we can materially reduce cost and the drivers that are identified. Here's a little bit of information about some of the clients that we've worked with over the past 15 years. Moving on to the bills themselves. So outside of taxes and fees that are typically dictated by the regulatory agencies and we really can't impact or do anything about at all, a typical commercial electrical bill is made up of three very different cost drivers. Let me get to my proper slide. Those cost drivers show up in three different places. One as energy or kilowatt hours used, and that's basically how much electricity is used over time. Two, in demand charges, and that's how much electricity you use in a single moment. And three, capacity or system-related charges, and that's how the grid assigns long-term cost responsibility. And what trips most businesses up with this is reducing energy usage alone doesn't guarantee lower bills. Obviously, reduction in kilowatt hours will make reductions, but sometimes those reductions in energy consumption don't mean as much as what's going on with demand and capacity charges that you're being charged for. Across many commercial bills, we found that demand and capacity related charges can account for 30, 40, and even sometimes 50% of the total monthly costs. So if you don't really understand which charges are driving your bill, it's easy to focus on the wrong levers and really not have any impact. So how do charges actually show up on bills? Let's make this practical. And let me get to a proper slide here so I can show you some real world examples of this. And depending on where your facility is located, these charges show up very differently. Like in some markets, demand appears as a monthly kilowatt hour based delivery charge, where a single short spike at any point in the day can impact the entire month. In other cases, demand is ratcheted, meaning one high peak can influence, and I'm talking about a peak that might take place for 15 seconds, can influence charges not only for that day and that month, but sometimes into the future. In certain regions, capacity related costs are explicitly itemized while others are embedded into supply pricing, making it really difficult to understand with each of the utilities exactly how you impact the charges and what you can do to mitigate some of those charges. In some regions, the capacities costs are explicitly itemized. Sometimes they're embedded in supply pricing, and sometimes they're embedded in time of use or demand heavy markets and impacted by peak hour usage. In other words, during the middle of the day, during the warmest days of the year, those typical peak hour usage you're penalized for using more demand or more of your energy at those periods than you are if you were using energy in the middle of the night. But the same underlying issues exist most everywhere. You know, we can look at all of these different bills, but we end up having some of the same issues. And that most cases and most costs are both behavior driven and rate driven. So again, we can cut down in consumption, but if we don't understand how to cut down in consumption during the right periods of the day, we may not be able to make as much impact as we otherwise would. So let's look at some real life examples here. And I'm going to make a switch here in my slides just so that you guys can see this a little bit more clearly. So to ground this in reality, let's look at a few patterns that have showed up and a few of the bills that we've evaluated here. And I've tried to do my best to highlight some of these sections. In some cases, I can't even dive in and show you or explain exactly where these things are because they're literally embedded in some of the line items that I'm showing within the yellow sections. But we'll do our best to break this down in a few of the markets that we're looking at here today. So in demand markets in parts of the country, and I'm doing some examples here in New Jersey, Illinois, Texas, California, we saw situations where one short-term demand spike drove some of these costs up by 30 to 50% on the total monthly bill. And in some cases, I believe this New Jersey bill that's here on the right, they're in a rate classification where one event during one of the warmer days during the month set capacity charges to a point where those are set in place essentially for all of the next year. So one small sample size of whatever the highest use during that period basically dictated some significant costs that were going to take place for the next year. And those can't be changed until the following year when all of that's monitored again so that you can take advantage of reducing your capacity charge or capacity tag for the following year. So as an example, we've got some New Jersey bills here. And in New Jersey, some facilities saw demand charges make up over 20% of the entire bill, meaning one poorly timed peak event materially changed monthly cost. We've got some bills for, I believe, Maryland and Illinois. In Illinois, delivery-related demand and facility charges were among the single highest line items that you can see that are in here as well. We've got a complete section here for delivery that is making up About a quarter of the bill in this particular case in Illinois. In Texas, demand ratchets cause single spike influence charges for multiple months, multiplying the financial impact well beyond the original event. In other words, one event ratcheted up and multiplied the charges that were going to take place further down the line. Um, Looking at the bills specifically, and I think if we go back to the PSE&G, which are in New Jersey here, capacity-related charges appeared as BGS capacity and PLC-based line items. And you'll see those that are highlighted here. And the total electric delivery charges, that's $637, is a significant component of the total charges for electricity in this particular bill. If we look at the bill on the right that we mentioned earlier, they're making up about 25%. Again, looking back here, we talked about Illinois, but looking at Maryland and Maryland in the BGE utility area, these bills, supply charges actually included capacity, PLC, and transmission components. So you wouldn't see those lined out quite the same way that you did over here with the New Jersey bills, where those are line itemed out. If you'll look at Maryland, those all end up being jumbled into the electric supply charge. And so some of that is hidden, particularly when you're buying the electricity from the utility. That can typically be further broken down if you've got a third party contract, and that begins to be separated, and you can see actually what you're being charged for the supply or the energy, raw energy itself, versus what the capacity is. I don't want to get into a lot of details about different products that are available out there, but one of the things that we've really begun to do in these areas where capacity tags and capacity charges have increased the way that they have is to separate the energy from the capacity, so that we are literally just trying to do our best to get the lowest price for raw energy or electricity under contract. Then once we diagnose what the capacity charges are and what the rules are for that particular area, then we can start working on reducing capacity and demand in some cases in those areas based on timing, use, and that type of stuff. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here further. Moving on to Pennsylvania, here are a couple of different utilities here, and capacity costs are also embedded in supply in one of these. And in the Met Ed, it is broken down further into a very complicated mess that is hard really to figure out when you're looking at these original bills. And again, what we find a lot of time, particularly as we look here at PPL, if we do an energy only contract and we do a capacity pass through, then the capacity charges then become separated, where we can actually see what capacity charges were and just contract out a lower number for our supply and energy costs there. In each of these cases, capacity cost wasn't driven by total monthly usage. It was driven by how the facility performed during a small number of peak hours of the day. In time of use and direct access markets, particularly in California, we saw facilities with very good overall efficiency still facing high bills because of peak period demand and non-bypassable charges dominating the cost structure. And I think I've got a California bill here. Yeah, we do. Got a Delaware here showing some of what we also discussed, where we've got distribution and transmission taking on some of those costs that we're referring to. It's very clearly stated here on this PG&E bill here in California exactly what the demand charges were, making up what looks like maybe 11% or so of that bill in this particular case. In more kilowatt hour driven accounts, we still found opportunities tied to runtime, scheduling drift, and riders. And some of what we'll talk about really has to be evaluated for each individual state and each individual utility, because there might be different options that we have available to us that are going to give us opportunities in different ways, depending on the market, to cut some of those demand and capacity costs. Just to kind of give you an idea of how crazy this can be, I'm going to pull this statement up here. Really, I did more of a further breakdown on how these charges are broken down, what percentage is being allocated or separated in demand charges versus capacity and some other charges. And you can see it really is crazy. Literally, for each different utility, we had to go through and break down these charges in such a way to diagnose kind of inside out where those capacity and demand charges are. As an example, in New Jersey, JCP&L, we saw one here where we've got demand charges taking almost 24%. PSE&G, we've got capacity and demand 57% in that particular case. That seems a little odd. ComEd in Illinois, demand 32%. Ameren in Illinois, demand not diagnosable because of the fact that it was bundled in with some other charges. Encore, ratcheted demand, 38.87%. Centerpoint, AEP, capacity demand, again, that one was bundled, so we couldn't tell exactly what that looked like. BG&E, capacity transmission, around 18.25%. Pennsylvania Met Ed, demand, 8.97%. So you can see these are all over the board, and they really take evaluating each bill depending on rate class and usage and a lot of other things in order for us to really diagnose for your facility exactly what's needed so that we can make an impact on those things. Let's move this back to the background here for a second. So where do cost-cutting measures exist, right? So there are a few things that we can do. So opportunities that are available to us. Once we understand the bill and once we dissect the charges, then we can move on to things like energy management and bill intelligence. So after looking at the bill, we figure out which charges are fixed versus which ones are controllable. We look at whether costs are driven by kilowatt hour usage, by kilowatt demand, capacity, or timing. We look to find within your scope of your building which behaviors or systems are being influenced by those charges. And this often leads to immediate no cost or low cost operational changes. Now, I don't want to give the impression that in every case you can significantly impact your bill by no cost, I guess you could say no cost concepts or no cost additional equipment, because that's not always the case. But we found that in most cases, there are things that you can do immediately that are going to impact your demand charges and your capacity charges without having to spend a penny. There are other cases where you're going to have to spend some money. Most of those, we can evaluate the ROI and what the savings are going to be on the front end in such a way that those savings will be recouped within a period of a couple to 3 years. What else can we do? We've got demand management and peak control solutions. So when demand charges are a major driver, we can integrate interval monitoring and peak alerts. In other words, let you know when the peak timing is going to take place. We have intelligence through the utility companies that let us know when they're going to be doing the peak monitoring on days so that we could let you know, as an example, when you need to maybe cut a couple of AC units either back, eliminate them for a period of a couple of hours, or there are some other systems that we can put in place to manage that in an automated way. We can do scheduling and sequencing strategies. We can incorporate wireless lighting controls and demand limiting logic, which everyone should be doing anyway. And we can put in place peak day operational playbooks. In other words, hey, during this period of time, let's ramp up our AC to cool the building in advance, turn the AC units or some of the AC units off for a period of time so that we're not having a peak event take place within those couple or few hours that the utility is going to monitor for your demand and capacity charges for the future. Next, we've got capacity and peak season mitigation strategies. So this is also where peak load shaving becomes a major cost-cutting opportunity. And the peak load shaving simply means intentionally reducing the facility's load during specific moments when the grid is under the most stress. Typically, those utilities that are monitoring that will let you know. We can find out exactly when they're going to be monitoring that. Typically, it's during the hottest days, during the middle of the day when everyone is running their AC units. But we can evaluate when that's going to take place so that we can build mitigation strategies around that. These peaks don't happen all the time. In most cases, they occur in a small number of critical intervals each month and each year. So we identify what the demand and capacity is for a major cost driver, and we can help our clients employ peak load shaving by identifying which of those systems are driving the peak load, sequencing or temporarily limiting non-critical equipment, adjusting schedules and set points or lighting levels during peak windows, using controls, and this is the major one, using controls, alerts, and operational playbooks to manage those moments intentionally. And what's new, and if you don't know a lot about EV and what the technology has done over the last several years, is it significantly advanced our battery storage systems. So what's becoming popular now is integrating battery energy storage systems where appropriate to discharge during peak events. In other words, those batteries will charge overnight when peak use is lower, kilowatt hour cost is lower, and then during the middle part of the day, when those peak evaluations are going to be done by the utility, the battery systems can operate a number of your pieces of equipment during that period so that it takes the load, the peak load, and the usage down during those peak charge times. So it's a very significant strategy that's in place there. I actually have an example I want to show you guys. I'm going to open this up a little bit. So this is a California hotel. This on the right is their overall consumption stats on a daily basis. And you can see the gray wave is essentially their usage pattern by time of day. So as you can imagine, as it gets early in the morning, not a lot of usage. As the day goes on during the summer months and the AC is running, those peak usage or the usage of the equipment is going up pretty significantly. And then as we get back into the evening, that starts trending back down. Well, as we mentioned before, somewhere in this area, the utility company is monitoring what's going on, in this case in California, with demand. And they're charging a significant amount of money on top of usage for you going above a certain amount in your kilowatt usage. So what happened here is we implemented battery peak demand battery storage systems into this hotel, shaving this down to a point where the batteries charge themselves at night during these periods, and then took this peak demand significantly down to a point where this hotel is saving about $5,000 a month. They'll get their money back on the battery storage system within a period of 2 to 3 years max. And these battery storage systems are rated for anywhere from 10 to 20 years. So significant savings on peak load shavings. And this is just one of the strategies that can be put in place to assist in doing that, the peak load shaving, and one of the strategies that you can cut down in your capacity and your demand charges. So what are some of the other cost-cutting opportunities? Obviously, energy efficiency and controls that align with billing. Once we understand the bill, then we can start targeting, do you have LED lighting systems in all the spaces? Do you have wired or network controls in place that control things to make sure that systems that you don't need or aren't being used during the day are off so that you're not having those impact your demand and capacity? And better scheduling, daylight harvesting, or occupancy-based strategies that we can put in place as well. All of these solutions reduce runtime. They cut down on peak load and peak exposure, not just on energy use. Why would most of these businesses miss out on saving, or why do most businesses miss out on savings? Here are some of the reasons. Most businesses focus only on the price per kilowatt hour when they're incorporating new equipment. They ignore delivery and system charges. They don't realize that one peak event can undo months of savings. I have a client in New Jersey that is literally having to live with a capacity tag that is set for an entire year based upon charges the previous customer, previous tenant had in place for their capacity tag. Significant charges. And the only way we're going to be able to change that capacity tag is to know that during the warmer months this summer coming up, we have some strategies that we're putting in place to make sure that when we get notification that capacity is going to be monitored by the utility, and we typically get those the morning of, we will have a strategy that's in place that automatically prepares his building to reduce that peak load during the middle part of the day by doing some pre-cooling, making sure that lights in spaces that aren't being used are cut down or cut off, just a number of different things. And I expect in this particular case, and this is a customer that's probably going to spend somewhere in the upwards of $30,000 a year, this year on his electricity, we can probably cut $1,000 a month out of his utility cost by cutting that capacity tag down. So it can be pretty significant. What else is our businesses missing? They assume that meaningful reductions require major capital outlays. Sometimes that's the case, and many times that's not. They're also, particularly with the battery storage systems, we have a system that can be put in place that requires no capital outlay. It can be put on a lease system or a shared savings system. So there are a lot of things that can be done without having to put a penny out of pocket. In reality, many of the best opportunities just come from some operational adjustments, better timing and awareness, smarter control strategies at little or no cost. And I'll go back to one of the previous live events that I did. This really is about planning, particularly for new facilities. If you have an existing facility, we'd love to take a look at your bill. There are things that we can do to help you that cost little or nothing. And there are more aggressive strategies that you can put in place that might cost money, but have a pretty significantly attractive ROI to them. So I wouldn't ignore those. If you're building a new facility, many times those things that you can incorporate and plan on the front end cost much less. One of the problems that I see is a lot of planning is not done on the front end for these type of things. And I'd like to engage any of you to reach out if you're planning a new building so that we can help you to incorporate those into your new facilities. So what's the takeaway from today, or what are the takeaways today? If there's one takeaway, I'd say that most energy savings don't start with new equipment. They start with understanding the bill. Once you know what's driving the cost, you can decide which charges you can influence immediately, where operational changes make sense, and which products and controls actually move the needle. At EnergyWise Solutions, we process the process starts with us dissecting the bill, identifying the biggest cost drivers, and then aligning the right mix of energy management tools, demand strategies, efficiency solutions, and procurement intelligence to your specific situation. And I will say procurement is a very important component. If you're in a deregulated state, if you aren't sure if you are, please reach out to us and let us know. But there's significant savings for procuring energy at the right time. We have a system, Energy Edge AI, that alerts us when the rates are down at their lowest so that you can buy your energy, your raw energy at the lowest possible price. But that can be incorporated as a solution that's built in as well. So if you'd like help walking through your energy bill or understanding where the biggest opportunities are, that's the next step. Reach out to EnergyWise Solutions, reach out to me, send us a bill, and let's start with clarity, not just assumptions. So next, I'd like to move to questions. If anyone has any questions in here, I've got a few questions that came in earlier that I'd like to go ahead and answer. And if any of you have any questions live, I'll go ahead and take those as well. So here's one that we have. So why doesn't reducing energy usage always lower my bill? That's a good question. So reducing energy usage doesn't always reduce costs because a large portion of the commercial electricity bills isn't really based on monthly consumption. A large portion is, but a good portion, based upon what we've already talked about here, is not based on the consumption. Many of those charges are driven by peak demand or capacity, where a single short interval or a few peak hours can account for a large portion of the bill. And that's why usage reductions overall aren't going to move the needle as much as you'd like or as much as you need in some cases. Let's see, got another question here. What's the difference between demand charges and capacity charges? So demand charges, and this is a tough one because different utilities are calling these different things, right? So demand charges are typically based on the highest level of electricity used during a short interval of time, and that's within the billing cycle. Capacity charges are based on how your facility performed during specific peak hours, usually during a longer period of time. And those typically drive cost for an extended period of time versus the demand charges that usually are impact your bill for that particular month. Question number 3. What is peak load shaving and how does it disrupt operations? That's good. So peak load shaving means intentionally reducing or offsetting the load only during the most critical peak moments. And this can be done through planning, operational sequencing, controls, or battery storage. So traditionally, before battery technology was where it is today, we employed, and we still do employ, an energy manager building management system where everything can be put on a schedule. Whether you have a restaurant, you could put that equipment on there, your lighting, indoor, outdoor lighting, other equipment that you have, heating and air conditioning, so that you can monitor and manage those heating and air conditioning settings remotely and on a schedule. So prior to having the battery technology, that was our only way of really managing those. Now we've got the additional aspect of having the battery technology in place so that we can schedule periods with that energy management system where the batteries charge themselves at nighttime and the batteries then come into play to help support the use of the energy that's going to be needed at the peak operational time. So when implemented correctly, it doesn't disrupt normal operations and typically only affects a small fraction of the total operating hours to begin with. The next question, what's the first step in lowering my energy costs? Well, I would say the first step is understanding your bill. Really, maybe going back to what the real first step is, give us a call, DM me, and let me know. I'd love to be able to do a consultation with you so that we can take a look at your bill, so that we can understand your bill, translate that for you. Once you know which changes or charges are driving up cost, you can determine whether the best solution is operational changes, demand management, energy efficiency upgrades, procurement strategy, or a combination of approaches that might include peak load shaving. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I appreciate it. Again, DM me. I'd love to be able to talk with you about your energy bill and energy strategy. Reach out to me at EnergyWise Solutions, send a bill, and let's get started with clarity and not assumptions. Have a great day.